Well, something's changing out there. Something for the better. I can feel it. You can probably feel it too. Things are turning around. Not saying things aren't horrible and they're going to get worse, but already there's starting to be signs of serious, genuine pushback to this assault on our country and everything it stands for. One of the most visible signs, I think, and one of the most important, isn't an American sign at all, really. It's the Canadian trucker convoy, the freedom convoy of truckers who decided, whether they're vaccinated or not, they didn't want to be told that they had to take the vaccine. So in a line of trucks that's been described variously from 40 to 70 miles long, that's not the distance they traveled, that's how big the line is. They've been moving across Canada, and everywhere you go, you would see people standing out there in January and February in the freezing cold, holding up big signs for freedom, honking their horns, waving the Canadian flag, heading to the Canadian capital of Ottawa, where Prime Minister Justin Trudeau apparently saw this line of regular people, just, regular people, headed his way, and he took off to an undisclosed location, which I'm sure is behind steel blast doors. Now, when he was questioned about this, he said, I'm not meeting with these white supremacist, racist, intolerant, whatever you want to put in there. You know the mix by now. Somebody pointed out to him, well, you meet with BLM protesters. And he essentially said, no, that's completely different. Those are our kind of protesters. I don't want to meet with real people. And the fact that he called them white supremacists and racists and any other number of adjectives is a pretty clear indication that we know who his enemy is. His enemy is the Canadian people. And it's exactly the same down here. Now, here's the thing that gets kind of interesting for me. When I heard that term freedom convoy, I thought, great. And I saw the pictures. And so what is it about this that feels so familiar to me? And then I realized, oh my God, I remember, because I was part of the longest and most widespread protest against U.S. government authority, certainly in my lifetime, and I think probably in the history of the country. It was a time when every single American, practically without exception, was in open defiance of the law to protest what the U.S. government was doing. And I'm talking about the 55-mile-an-hour speed limit. In 1973, the Arab oil embargo began. OPEC decided to punish America for supporting Israel and basically cut off our oil supplies. Now, what that meant was we suddenly didn't have gasoline anymore. Lines formed at gas stations. The lines were 2-3 hour long wait just to get gas at whatever price. There was a rumor system going around. We didn't have an internet then, but I remember very, very clearly people saying, I think there's gas available up on the number 2 rest stop up on the Florida Turnpike. And then you'd get in your car and you drive 35 or 40 miles to get some fuel and another 40 miles to come home. It was miserable. You couldn't go anywhere. You couldn't do anything. And it was essentially a result of the government outsourcing all of our energy needs to OPEC. Now, in order to solve this crisis, the government swung into action. The next year, on January 2nd, 1974, Richard Nixon signed the Emergency Highway Energy Conservation Act. It's a nice name for everybody has to drive 55 miles an hour. Now, what most people forget, certainly Europeans don't remember and never really understood about this country, is this isn't just a country, this is a continent. This is 2,500 miles from one side to another. And in parts of the country, you can spend practically all day driving, not even see another car. I personally drove the Florida Turnpike all the time, which is flat as a board, straight as an arrow, 20 miles to the horizon, cranks 10 degrees left, another 20 miles, cranks 10 degrees right. And to do 55 miles an hour on a road like that was torture. It honestly felt like you could walk that fast. It was torturous. It was oppressive. Everybody hated it. Everybody hated it. And they hated it even more when they found out that the total amount of energy savings in terms of barrels used per year, the 55-mile-an-hour speed limit, they estimated, saved the United States anywhere from 0.2% to 1% of its total energy use, and for that, everybody else must be miserable. Now, let me know if any of this sounds familiar to you in this age of national lockdowns and national mask mandates and vaccine passports and all the rest of it. Because of the incompetence of the government, utterly draconian law was imposed upon the entire country, and you just had to deal with it. And here's what happened. For the first couple months, people kind of accepted it. They thought it wouldn't last long. It's our part. We'll do our part to help keep America going. And then, again, just let me know if any of this sounds familiar. But as it became clear that this was going to continue, the pressure against this god-awful rule increased and increased and increased until finally a spark hit the gunpowder keg. And that spark, of all things, was a song that was written by a guy named C.W. McCall called Convoy. Convoy was released in 1975. I was listening to AM radio at the time, and AM radio was playing Convoy every third song. Just call the radio station, play Convoy again. Every 15 minutes or so, Convoy would be on the radio. And what it did was it started a national phenomenon, but that national phenomenon would never have existed without this oppressive law that was sitting on top of every single citizen of the United States of America. And once Convoy came out, and once the tone of that song came out, then began a revolution of the quiet people, the silent majority, a rebellion, kind of a polite rebellion against police, against the government, against the federal government, against all of these laws that were imposed upon us. Didn't do any good. So what kind of form did that take? Well, the reason we started Convoys, truckers started it. They must have been really annoyed when all the civilians like me got involved. But basically what would happen is you would have a truck in the front, he's the front door, then you'd have a line of trucks that would be 5 trucks long, 50 trucks long, 5 miles long, who knew? Passenger cars in there as well, and everybody's barreling down the Florida Turnpike at 75 miles an hour. Now, we know there's speed traps all over the place, and we know that somebody's going to get pulled over, but we're not all going to get pulled over. And that was the entire idea of a convoy. And that's how we drove around the country for years and years and years. I had a friend named Rick Brown when I was at the University of Florida, and we were working together on films, and every weekend for one semester, we had to drive from Gainesville, Florida, the University of Florida, back down to our homes in Miami. It's a 6-hour drive on the most boring drive in the world. And all along that route were any number of speed traps because the government was making a lot of money off of this particularly gruesome rule as well. And here's what I remember about those trips. I remember that Rick was driving, and I was the electronic warfare officer. We had 3 radar detectors in that car, fuzzbusters, I think, looking forward, looking back, and another like a laser detector or something. And I'm monitoring the signals. There's always radio signals and radar signals buzzing around. When does it get strong enough to be a potential, oh, there it is, okay, contact, 010 degrees, 2 miles. And sure enough, everybody would start slowing down. They'd get past the police point, and then they'd speed up to a reasonable speed again. On a personal note, I might point out to you the level of not even pain, really, just frustration that this caused. Because about 2 or 3 months before the Arab oil embargo began, my dad bought one of these. Now, I loved this car. I loved looking at a picture of this car. It's a 1972 Mercury Marquis station wagon in sapphire blue with the woody side panels. My dad loved that car. I loved that car. Before the oil embargo began, by the way, we took a trip up to Disney World. He was a hotel manager, so we got early access to Disney World. And on that trip with the whole family in the car, he made the announcement that he was going to take that car up to 100 miles an hour. And the only thing I remember about that station wagon doing 100 miles an hour was that I was absolutely convinced that I was on a hovercraft because the car was simply floating. It was just doing this. He didn't have to turn. He's on the Florida Turnpike. You don't need a steering wheel if you're on the Florida Turnpike. But that car was just barely there. Anyway, after the oil embargo, now we're looking at this station wagon, and my father comes home one day extremely dejected and looks at this car that we all love so much, and he said, I apparently have just bought the car with the lowest miles per gallon rating in the history of American automobile technology. I don't know if that statement was true, but I do know that that station wagon got 7 miles to the gallon in the city. On the highway, that improved to 11 miles per gallon. You would burn as much gas going to find gas as you would if you just left the car at home. Here's the car we bought a few years later to replace the magnificent American land yacht because of the gas crunch. It's a 1976 Chevy Vega, caught here in an extremely rare photograph, by the way, with the hood down. The Wikipedia entry on the Vega said that subsequently the car became widely known for a range of problems related to its engineering, reliability, safety, propensity to rust, and engine durability. I can tell you that our family Chevy Vega, which looked like this one, got 5 out of 5 on that score. It was rusting already in Florida, and after about a year, it suffered a crack in the engine block, which is not the least expensive repair that you can perform on an automobile. So again, what does this have to do with what's going on right now? Well, this trucker convoy is the exact same phenomenon that we saw back in the 1970s. It is the people, the regular people of Canada, basically saying, we've had enough. We've had enough, we're not going to take it anymore. Trudeau apparently accused the truckers in the convoy of stealing food from homeless people. It's an interesting way of putting things. My first response would have been, who do you think delivers the food to homeless people? There's going to be an American version of this probably at the end of this month, the end of February, and it's going to be, as everything else in America, much larger than the one in Canada, much further to go. And it's going to be a landmark event, I think, in the history of this country. Because the people in Washington are going to be as afraid of that convoy as Justin Trudeau is of the Canadian version. And they're going to be afraid of that convoy of truckers because they know that this is the voice of regular Americans. This is the voice of the people. They will make this out to be a second insurrection. They were already using the language that they used on the first attempt on January 6th of last year. They're already calling the truckers in Canada racist. They're calling them white supremacists. They're calling them every name in the book. And they're calling them every name in the book because they are afraid of them. And they should be afraid of them. Not for their physical safety, because nothing's going to happen to them. These are the kind of people that clean up the route as they drive along. Now, they're afraid because it is becoming clear to them now that the battle lines have been completely redrawn in this fight, and that it's no longer rich versus poor. It's no longer Republicans versus Democrats. It's no longer liberals versus conservatives. Now it is the people of the country at war with the government of the country, and it's the government that declared war on the people. I watched it happen in the 1970s, and here's a word that I have not heard in a long time, but I'll tell you, this is my honest reflection of it. During that 20-year period that the 55-mile-an-hour speed limit was in place, everybody got together using CB radios, flashing our lights at speed traps. We used radar detectors and all the rest. All of this to defy the federal government. And you know what? It was fun. It was actually kind of fun because for the first time in my memory, we were all in this together. And if the Democratic Party, which has always championed itself as the party of the little people, that's their brand, if it turns out that the millionaire and billionaire elitists of the Democratic Party decide that they're going to try and use force to stop truck drivers, then that shift from Democrat to Republican is going to increase enormously. And these people are going to finally realize what happens to a small group of elites who declare war on their own people.